Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to my weekly Dvar Torah. And today I would like to share something from the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. You know, in one of his wonderful weekly articles called Covenant and Conversation, he quoted Rabbi Neftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, who was the dean of the yeshiva in Volozhin, and who made the very sharp observation that Yitzchak and Rivka, Isaac and Rebekah, don't seem to have had very good communication with each other. No meaningful communication. And it was as a direct result of this stunted relationship that Yaakov received Isaac's blessing. Rebekah's relationship with Isaac, says the Netziv, was not the same as that between Sarah and Abraham, or Rachel and Jacob. When these couples had a problem, we see it in the Torah, they weren't afraid to speak to each other about it. But that wasn't the case with Rebekah. Actually, the Netziv senses this distance from the very first moment when Rebekah saw Isaac meditating in the field, at which point the Torah says she covered herself with a veil. And the Netziv comments, she covered herself out of awe and out of a sense of inadequacy, as if she felt she was unworthy to be his wife. And from then on, this fear was fixed in her mind. It defined their marriage. Their relationship, suggests the Netziv, was never casual or intimate, and the result was, at a series of critical moments, a failure of communication. Rebekah probably never informed Yitzchak about her communication with God that she'd had before she'd had the twins, which of course I discussed earlier on this week at my Parsha Shir. That was why she loved Yaakov more than Esav, because she knew that he was the one that had been chosen by God. But if only Yitzchak would have known this, perhaps his own attitude towards Esav would have been quite different and rather more constructive. But he didn't know anything. Do you know why? Because Rebekah hadn't told him. And that's why, many years later, when Rebekah heard that Isaac was about to bless Esav, she was forced into a horrible plan involving deception when she told Yaakov to pretend that he was Esav. Why didn't she just tell Yitzchak that it was Yaakov who needed the blessing? You know why? Because that would have forced her to admit that she'd kept her husband in the darkness, in ignorance about the prophecy that she'd heard all those years ago. Had she spoken to Isaac on the day of the blessing, who knows? Isaac might have reacted in a very positive way, and it would have changed the entire course of their lives and their children's lives. Can you imagine Isaac saying, "Of course I know that it's going to be Yaakov, not Esav, who will continue the covenant of Abraham. But I have two quite different blessings in mind. One for each of our sons. I'll give Esav a blessing of wealth and of power, but to Yaakov I'll give a blessing, the same blessing that God gave to Abraham and Abraham gave to me, the blessing of children, the blessing of the promised land." Can you imagine that? How many problems this would have prevented? Isaac had never intended to give the blessing of the covenant to the wrong son. He intended to give each child the blessing that suited them. The entire deceit, planned by Rebekah, carried out by Yaakov, was never necessary. But why did Rebekah not understand this? Because she and her husband did not communicate. What were the consequences? And this part is so horrific, so scary, so sad. Isaac, old and blind, felt betrayed by Yaakov. He trembled violently, the Torah says, when he realized what had happened. And he said to Esav, "Your brother came deceitfully." Esav likewise felt betrayed and felt such violent hatred towards Yaakov that he vowed to kill him, his brother. Rebekah was forced to send Yaakov into exile, thus depriving herself for more than 2 decades of the company of the son that she loved so much. And as for Yaakov himself, Jacob, the consequences of the deceit lasted a lifetime, resulting in strife between his wives and between his children. And when he arrived in Egypt, aged 130 years old, he told Pharaoh, "Few and evil have been the days of my life." 4 lives shattered and scarred by one act that had not even been necessary in the first place. That, my friends, is the price we pay for a failure to communicate properly. The Torah is exceptionally candid about these matters, which is what makes it such a powerful guide to life, real life, among real people with real problems. My friends, communication matters. That is why any leader, from a parent in the family home to a CEO in a massive company, must set as his or her task good, strong, honest and open communication. Good communication makes families, teams and corporate cultures healthy. Everyone must know what their overall aims are as a team, what their specific role is, what responsibilities they carry, and what values and behaviors they are expected to exemplify. There must be praise for those who do well as, of course, constructive criticism when people do badly. But it must be criticism of the act, not of the person, who must feel respected whatever his or her failures may be. There are times when clear communication is critical, and so much is at stake. Rabbi Sachs in his article says that at one point in recent history there was a moment when the fate of the entire world depended on good communication. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the US and the Soviet Union were on the brink of nuclear war, President Kennedy received two messages from the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. One was conciliatory, the other far more hawkish. Most of Kennedy's advisors believed that the second message represented Khrushchev's real views and should be taken seriously. However, there was one man, Llewellyn Thompson Jr., who had been the American ambassador to the Soviet Union from 1957 to 1962 and had come to know the Russian leader quite well. They'd been friendly, and he told Kennedy that the conciliatory message sounded much more like Khrushchev's own personal view, while the hawkish letter, which did not sound like him at all, had probably been written to appease the Russian generals. Kennedy took his advice. He listened to Thompson and gave Khrushchev a way of backing down without losing face, as a result of which global destruction was averted. Can you imagine what might have happened had Thompson not been there to establish which was and which wasn't the real act of communication? It's too frightening to think about. And that is what the power of good communication is about. Parents and leaders must establish a culture in which honest, open, respectful communication takes place, which involves not just speaking but also listening. Let me wish you a wonderful Shabbat and a beautiful month of Kislev. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.